Welcome to Relationship Reset with life coach Dr. Mark Shook. In each podcast, Mark will weave together the ancient truths of Scripture with the latest cutting-edge neuroscience in short, concise, effective, and doable principles and actions to reset your relationship dynamic.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Relationship Reset. This is your host, Coach Mark Shook, and I'm so excited to talk to you today about the U-turn. We've been talking about internal family systems, and there's a concept in internal family systems called the U-turn concept. It's a simple but powerful method for resolving conflict and understanding your emotional responses by turning your focus inward rather than outward. The U-turn helps us shift from blaming or reacting to others to taking a deeper look at what's happening inside of us. What parts, remember we talked about parts, what parts of ourselves are being activated and why. I'll explain what the U-turn is, how it works, and why it's so important for emotional healing. Well, what is the U-turn? The U-turn is a process that involves turning your attention away from external triggers and focusing on your internal emotional experience. In everyday life, when someone says or does something that upsets us, our immediate reaction is often to blame or react toward them. We might think, they made me angry, or they're making me feel hurt. What the U-turn invites us to do is something different. Instead of focusing on the other person, we turn inward and ask, what's happening inside of me right now? Which parts of me are reacting to the situation? Essentially, the U-turn is about self-awareness and shifting the focus from the external situation to our internal responses. This shift allows us to understand ourselves better and approach the situation from a place of compassion rather than reactivity. Well, why do we need the U-turn? Well, without the U-turn, we often respond from that place of reactivity, from some of our parts that have been triggered. We project our feelings outward onto others, which can escalate conflicts and prevent us from understanding the true root of those emotional reactions. Remember, we might just be having an emotional flashback. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone criticizes you at work and you immediately feel angry. Without the U-turn, you might snap back at them, get defensive, or stew in resentment. But with the U-turn, you pause, you turn inward. You might realize that it's not just about the criticism. Maybe that criticism is triggering a deeper part of you that feels insecure or unworthy. The U-turn helps us see where our emotions are really coming from and why we're reacting so strongly. Often our intense emotional reactions are linked to those deeper, unresolved feelings that stem from those earlier experiences or earlier traumas. Well, how do you do the U-turn? The U-turn involves several simple steps that help you check in with yourself rather than react to someone else. So here's the steps. First, pause. When you feel emotionally triggered by something that someone says or does, instead of reacting immediately, take a moment to pause. This pause is crucial because it gives you the space to shift from reactive to reflective mode. Then turn inward. Ask yourself, what's exactly happening inside of me right now? This is the moment where you turn your attention back on yourself, like making a U-turn in traffic. Instead of thinking, they're making me angry, or you make me so mad, ask, what's this anger about? Or what part of me is feeling triggered? And it's important, third, to identify your parts. Remember, in internal family systems, we recognize that different parts of us are activated in response to different situations. Use the U-turn to identify which part of you is reacting. Is it a manager part that's trying to control the situation? An exile part that feels vulnerable or rejected? By naming the part, you begin to understand what's driving your reaction. And then number 4, self-compassion. Once you identify the part that's triggered, offer it compassion. Rather than judging yourself for feeling a certain way, approach your emotions with kindness. This helps calm the triggered part and reduces the intensity of the emotional response. And then 5th, respond thoughtfully. After doing the U-turn, you can choose to respond to the situation from a place of understanding rather than reactivity. You might still address the issue, but you'll do it with a clearer sense of your own feelings and needs rather than projecting anger or blame onto others. Well, why does the U-turn work? It prevents escalation. By pausing and turning inward, you stop yourself from escalating a conflict. Often when we react from an emotional place, we escalate the situation. The U-turn helps you avoid that escalation and allows for a more thoughtful, grounded response. Secondly, it's going to build emotional awareness. The U-turn helps you become more aware of your emotional triggers and the parts of you that get activated. The more you practice it, the better you'll get at understanding your internal world, which leads to emotional growth. And then 3, it promotes self-responsibility. This is the big one. Instead of blaming others for how we feel, the U-turn encourages us to take responsibility for our own emotions. And this is empowering because it means we have the tools to manage our emotions rather than being at the mercy of external circumstances. Let me just go through a practical example. Imagine you're in a conversation with a friend and they say something critical about your decisions. Immediately, you feel a rush of anger. Without the U-turn, you might snap back at them and get defensive, saying something like, "Why are you always judging me?" But with the U-turn, 1, you pause, take a deep breath. 2, you turn inward and ask, what's really going on inside of me right now? Why am I so upset? 3, you realize that a part of you feels hurt, triggered, because the criticism is touching on an old insecurity, a part of you that feels inadequate or not good enough. You recognize that it's not just about the friend's comment, it's about a deeper wound, one of those raw spots. 4, you offer self-compassion to that part of you. You say to yourself, it's okay to feel hurt. This is touching on something painful, but I can handle it. 5, instead of snapping at your friend, you respond more thoughtfully. You might say something like, when you said that, it brought up some old feelings of insecurity for me. I know that wasn't your intention, but that's why I reacted so strongly. See, by doing the U-turn, you've managed the situation with much more emotional intelligence. You've avoided an unnecessary argument. You've deepened your understanding of your own emotions. Why is the U-turn important for emotional healing? Here's the thing. The U-turn is a critical tool for emotional healing because it helps us develop a deeper understanding of ourselves and our internal parts. By focusing on what's happening inside rather than what's happening outside, we can do several things. 1, process unresolved emotions. Often the intense reactions we feel, we've talked about this, are linked to past experiences or deeper insecurities. The U-turn helps us uncover these unresolved emotions and work through them. Another thing it does is it improves relationships. When we take responsibility for our own emotional responses, we're less likely to blame others. Very important in marriage. This leads to healthier and more open communication. It increases self-compassion. The U-turn encourages us to be kind to ourselves, even when we're feeling triggered or emotional. This self-compassion is crucial for emotional growth and healing. So here's the thing. The U-turn is a simple but powerful tool in internal family systems that helps us turn our attention inward, identify the parts of ourselves that are being triggered, and respond to situations with greater awareness and compassion. And by practicing the U-turn, we can manage our emotions more effectively, improve our relationships, and deepen our understanding of ourselves. It's so important to take responsibility for our own internal experiences during moments of conflict or emotional reactivity. Shift focus from external triggers to internal responses. And that makes such a big difference. There's one other concept that I want to go over with you along with the U-turn that can help make all the difference in the world in a relationship. So let's talk about that just a little bit. We're going to be talking about identifying parts and being able to figure out what part is trying to control the situation, whether it's a manager or a firefighter part or an exile part. We've talked about some of those different things. We've got to know where this part is coming from and what it looks like. Because when we get hurt like that, we blame others and react to them when it's really something that's triggering us. So what part of it is it that is activated? How can you deactivate it? Well, here's how you deactivate it along with the U-turn. It's called speaking for, not from. It's the idea of speaking for our parts rather than speaking from them. This means that instead of being fully blended with an emotional part such as anger or anxiety, we acknowledge it and speak on its behalf. So again, an example would be instead of reacting in anger, you might say, a part of me is feeling very angry right now because it feels disrespected. This technique allows us to create a little bit of emotional distance between that God part of us, that true self of us, and the parts of us that are upset. It gives us the space to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. So today, what I wanted you to learn is that the combination of the U-turn and speaking for our parts helps to foster a sense of inner compassion, non-judgment, allowing us to understand ourselves more deeply. It also reduces the intensity of emotional reactions and helps prevent escalation in interpersonal conflicts. I want you to apply this week in real life situations, especially in marriage. Those of you who are married, that's what I love about marriage. It's a great place to grow. It's a great place to learn to take responsibility for your own feelings. Instead of saying, he or she makes me so angry, know that we can say, taking a step back, what's inside of me that's doing this? Well, guys, gals, I'm so excited for you. Practice that this week, and I can't wait to see you in a couple of days.